All right, we're back to you, John.
All right. Well, that was great. And as always, and hi, Italian. Italian is lives in Bermuda, and we can see the ocean behind her. So I'm very jealous because we're having our first cold day in Dallas today of the year. So welcome everybody. I see Don's joined us from the south of Spain, and a few other folks from Los Angeles and Boston and all over the place. So welcome to you all. Hopefully you all got all of that. If not, it will be on our YouTube channel, of course. But John does a super job explaining the history of all this and how it kind of came about and why it's so relevant, especially in the recovery area. And I know a lot of people on the call today, you're involved in athletics, whether you're training yourself and or you train other people. So hopefully you got a lot out of that. So let's move forward. So a couple of weeks ago, I met via our podcast network, one of my other little businesses. I met this young lady, Tracy Doyle, and she's a fascinating person. I'll tell you a little bit about her, and I'll turn the mantle over to her. But Tracy has been a entrepreneur, graduate of Montclair State University in New Jersey, right down the street from Seton Hall, my alma mater. So we were kind of laughing about that the other day. We're both Jersey people. But Tracy founded a multi-million dollar medical communication company a number of years ago. And she also has various degrees in a couple of different disciplines in terms of psychology. And Tracy has written a book recently. I'll tell you a little bit about this book because I've only read the certain parts of it. I haven't got the actual book yet, but the parts that she was kind enough to send me. And the book is called Life Storms. And Life Storms is about finding your clear sky practices to overcome negative thinking, build connection, and find fulfillment. Now, that's a mouthful when you think about it, right? Because all of us here are children of self-development, right? We've all listened to Jim Rohn and Brian Tracy and Zig Ziglar and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And if you haven't, you should. Our lives are about self-development. Okay, whether you're my age, whether you're younger, whether you're older, it's about self-development. So this book really talks about that. A couple of other points to this. All right, practices to overcome negative thinking. Just think about that for a minute. We all are guilty of that from time to time, myself included. All right. It just happens. This is human nature. How do we overcome it? How do we move past it is one of the things that this book identifies. She's actually developed a system called the Aurora Method to help you to do that. And what she's going to be talking to us about today is, are you holding it together while falling apart? Who hasn't been there at some point in our lives, right? Everybody else says, oh, that guy's got it together. That gal's got it together. Yeah, if you only knew what was really going on, right? So anyway, with that, let me turn the call over to my new friend, Miss Tracy Doyle. How are you today, Tracy?
I'm good, thanks, John. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, appreciate you being here, and I will turn the call to you, my friend.
All right, great. Well, thanks everyone. As I get my slides up, just give me a moment. I have to see if I can do this. Okay, I got to get to the presentation mode here. Okay, the question, oh, how did I get to the end of my presentation? That's weird. Full slides. All right, let me just, I have to just swap my view because I have two computers. And for some reason, I can't do it. All right. Anyway, first, let me just say thank you, John. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity today. And as we embark on this, what I call the Bermuda Triangle of burnout, as we know, especially here in the United States, we start off with our Thanksgiving holidays, and then we start moving into, the Christmas and the Jewish holidays, and then we go into the New Year, which often causes a lot of stress. But the name of my talk and what I really want to share with you today is my journey of burnout going through breakthrough. You just heard from John all the various things that I've done. What I want to say first and foremost is that I'm still blown away that I am or I was an award-winning entrepreneur. I sold my business, an award-winning entrepreneur. And that together with my team, we generated, hundreds of millions of dollars in sales over 20 years. I'm still in awe that I wrote a book. I can't believe it. And in my industry, I'm still known as a legend for transforming science into clinical practice. That just blows my mind because it wasn't always like that. I started out and believing that I had to sacrifice myself in order to really make it, make it at work, make it in my family, make it, in my relationship. And well, that sacrifice took me on a journey. And this journey really started off with being the first in my family to go to college, and it started to take me to a place of stress, right? I first to graduate, and now I have to make it in the world. So I started feeling that stress. Well, as responsibilities increased in my life, and my life had some complexities in it. So yeah, I'm making it, as the overachiever because I had grown up in scarcity. And all of a sudden, I'm responsible for my mentally ill mom. I had to take responsibility of my sister's kids. And now I'm trying to manage my own relationship and getting married. Well, I started to feel a lot of overwhelm. And with that overwhelm, and this is really the burnout journey for most people, with that overwhelm became, started to transition into conflict. What conflict looked like was I just felt like no matter what I did, I was at odds with people. They just didn't seem to get me. They didn't understand me. They didn't, it felt like they didn't hear me. And then that led to, as you start to go into burnout, the frustration, right? The anger and those reactions that you don't mean to do, but they happen. And then I reached my breaking point. And I wanted to spend a little time on that breaking point because the journey of burnout can take many people to this place. And this is really relevant to my story. But that breaking point happened during the Bermuda Triangle because I can remember it like it was yesterday. It was December 21st in 1999. And, as I'm getting ready for work, I'm looking at myself in the mirror and, my eyes are hollow, my spirit's dim. I just felt and looked empty and in my head, I start really thinking about, gosh, it's Christmas. If I get drunk, maybe I'd get into an accident. And then I thought, yeah, if I got into an accident, no one would know that I wanted to die. And that's where burnout took me. And, I was jolted awake later that night by someone knocking on my window and yelling, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And as I jolted myself awake, I realized that my car was in a near head-on collision. I was on the opposite side of the road and I was
Hmm.
a hair away from a head-on collision. I'd gone through with that plan. And in that moment, I was like, what did I do? What have I done? How did I get so lost? And the emotion was so deep. It was just, how do I get my life back? And, that next day, when I realized what could have happened, it was like my head and my heart were fighting. It was like, Tracy, look what you could have done. You could have killed two people. And my heart just kept saying, but you're still here. So in that moment, I realized, I wanted to live and I wanted to live again. I was, raising my arms to the sky, like I want to live again. And that moment really became the moment I got my first lesson, which was sacrifice didn't mean abandoning myself, right? What it meant was putting myself first. And so the journey began because once I made the decision to accept help, actually not even making a decision, I gave myself permission to not only get help, but accept it. My journey to recovery began from there. And, what I learned as I climbed out of this was three key lessons. The first was that, it wasn't my family, it wasn't it wasn't any of that really my family, my job or anything that was causing this and breaking me. It was my own thinking. And it was beliefs that were shaped by early life experiences that really drove me. They drove how I thought, how I felt, how I reacted, how I showed up in every relationship. And when I learned when to reshape what was shaped, that's when I started to find my way back to myself, to my life, and to the people who mattered in my life. And so, the big question then was, how do you do this? And as I was going through this journey of how do you do this, what I realized was that recognizing the root of the emotional burnout can actually restore connection. There's a plethora of data that basically says, when you recognize your internalized beliefs, you can actually change the outcome. Well, for me, I was like, how on earth do I do that? Well, the first thing I had to tackle was overcoming the myths about change. How many of you, and I'm sure, I can't see everyone on the screen, but how many of you go to when you're feeling really stressed and overwhelmed, if they would just change. If they just didn't do that, I wouldn't have reacted that way. Or it's me. If I just keep doing more, then when things calm down, it'll get better and I'll be okay. And these reactions will stop and these frustrations will change and my negative thinking and outlook is going to get better. Or conflicts sometimes are at work, sometimes they're at home. Well, it's about us. And so if they're not willing to do anything about it, well, then what's the point of doing it? Because it's an us thing and it takes two to create change. Well, what I've learned is that when we change, when we have an internal shift, then we can ripple out and change a lot of dynamics. So at this point, what I want to say is that when we recognize that change is possible by recognizing internalized beliefs and shifting our mindset, because as I said, the data from psychologists, many psychologists and psychiatrists will say, learn to shift. All the burnout data says shift your perspective. The question is always, is it possible? And I can tell you from experience, it is possible. So the first thing I had to understand, and I share with everyone, is that what's possible to realize this change, what's possible is understanding and accepting the universal truth. And that truth is that we're all wounded. So we've all had experiences in our lives where, be it being shunned at school, be it critical teachers, critical parents, be it not feeling supported by a parent, or in some cases, like in my case, enduring things like sexual abuse, physical abuse, or emotional neglect, or yet in other cases, for many people, significant traumas early, big losses, or a type of trauma that's just jarring. It doesn't matter because irrespective of all of our experiences collectively, and this is from my work with others, by the way, what I've realized is no matter what that wound was, if we internalize it, it's ours and it matters. And so what does it do, those wounds? Well, what I've learned is it creates two fundamental limiting beliefs. I'm not worthy and I'm not good enough. And they sit in what I call the eye of the storm. And what I found is that anytime there's any event, the way someone looks at you, someone questions you, the way people even, challenge you to think in a different way or do something different, it ignites or sparks those limiting beliefs and creates what I call the reaction cascade. And John wanted me to review with you what this reaction cascade looks like, especially as we go into the end of the year and we want to renew ourselves and reset ourselves for the new year. So the reaction cascade really, as I said, it starts when someone it feels weird, right? What happened? Why are you looking at me like that? I feel judged, or I don't feel heard and misunderstood. Well, what it becomes is that triggering event which ignites those two, one of those two limiting beliefs, which I always point to my toes, which then ignites fear. And I like the work of Tony Robbins. I know that he worked with Jim Rohn, but I love how he simplifies fear into loss, less, and never. So think about it. Internalized belief, I'm not good enough. All of a sudden, oh no, I'm going to lose my job. Or oh no, I'm going to do less in sales. Or oh no, I'm never going to get ahead and things aren't going to change. Or it could be in a relationship, either or. It doesn't matter. But when that fear is stoked, what happens next? Well, I always say that fear comes up back in between our two ears. And it stokes one of two things. And the first, and I call it as self-seeking, but it's really self-centered thinking. And so self-seeking really means we need validation or we want to people please, because if we do more for people, then maybe they'll recognize us. And so what starts to happen with that is we will just push forward in trying to get that recognition. And when we don't, we get real negative, real negative when that doesn't happen, which can stoke one of those reactions. And for many of us, as I said, in the me category, we just keep doing and doing and doing to that point of exhaustion, frustration, and burnout. On the other side of it is what I call ish thinking. So self-centeredness, as we know, is like a city of limitations, right? But when you look at it as selfish, most people will react. And so this isn't about looking at it from the perspective of, you're a bad person. It's about looking at what the definition of selfish really is, which is just really being absorbed with one's own needs, one's own desires. And so when you look at ish behavior, what I would like to say here is that this is about all the various traits that we develop as a result of fear triggering us. And where does it take us? So I give three examples. The first is self-avoidance. Oh, I'm not dealing with that, right? So what do we do when we're looking at conflict or we're frustrated and in the midst of emotional burnout? Well, we just leave or we just shut down. We go inside. Or we might become self-righteous, right? Oh, no, my way is better than your way. And we start getting into what I call a who's right fight. And I lift my hands on top of each other because there's only one winner. And we can't recognize why we're not getting along with anyone when we're absorbed with the need to be right. So, so avoidance is a behavior. Righteousness is a belief, right? It's a thought in terms of our morals being superior. And the other ish is a feeling. And in this example, it's pity, being absorbed with feeling sorry for oneself. I know in my case, that was a big one because I had some significant experiences. So if you had my life, you'd feel sorry for yourself too, is what I always thought, right? So, so basically what we look at is there's a plethora of issues and, they not look like, but their feelings, their thoughts, their behaviors. But when we recognize how fear can stoke what's inside, where do we go next? Well, what it drives us to is how we act and what other people see. And I call these the acts. Because what we don't recognize when we're trapped in this city of limitation within our mind, what happens is if we're self-seeking and we're like, do you recognize what I've done? Or at work, we might raise our hand like I did that. Oftentimes we create distrust rather than recognition. And we're frustrated that no one sees us. Or if we're in a personal relationship, we're looking for that recognition. And our partner might look at us and say, gosh, you're so needy, like back off, why do you keep coming at me like this? And we get frustrated and we withdraw. On the ish side of things, well, if we look at something like self-righteousness, we might be perceived as arrogant, and people are afraid to even engage with us. If we're self-reliant, which is another ish, thinking we have to do it all ourselves, people then just think we're just perfectionists. And why bother? Because we don't trust them anyway. And as you can see, all of these things start to create this erosion of connection and disconnection. So from there, the question is, how do we change this? And so as I said, the data are clear. We have to shift our perspective. But in my case, I'm stuck inside the city of limitation. And I'm like, how do I get out of that? Right? Well, what I've learned is when we can see it, we can name it, like I just showed you, and then we can change it. And that's what really has led me to breakthrough. Because what I had to go through trying to break out of this because the negative thinking kept me stuck. It kept me in a place where I was a leader as a CEO and I was burned out having reactions. I was self-reliant and people thought I didn't trust them. So I affected our culture in a way that was negative. But at home, I created the same thing. I created a disconnect. I was self-avoidant. I'm like, not dealing with anybody. And here I was on an island. And I wanted to find my way back. So as I started thinking about everything that I learned about internalized beliefs, having studied psychology and counseling, I asked myself the question, what if the triggering event was the driver of that internalized belief? How is it doing that? Well, what I'd come to learn is that the triggering event is nothing more than an unresolved resentment. Now, many of us might think resentment is I'm resentful at someone, I'm angry with them. What I've learned is that the word resentment comes from the French word ressentir, which basically means, feeling deeply or re-feeling deeply. So what I've learned is that when I recognize how these wounds and what they did in terms of me re-feeling them, what initial belief was created. You can see on my slide, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor here, but that unresolved resentment, that re-feel creates an initial belief. So I'll give you an example. In my case, my mom was mentally ill. And so, when I felt rejected, I would initially believe nobody cares about me. And when no one cared about me, I thought I wasn't good enough. And then what came here was a never fear. I'm never going to belong. I'm never going to be liked, which then pushed me over to the self-seeking side at home with family and friends. And they thought I was insecure and needy, and they could never fill my void of needing praise and recognition. But that was an inside job to change. But on the other side of it, if I felt that way at work, I all of a sudden became very controlling, very, very self-reliant. No one cares. I have to do it myself. And as I did, people perceived me as being, someone who didn't trust them, someone who was an overcommitted overdoer, and they just backed off. And meanwhile, I'm creating this whole environment of I got to do it all myself. And if I don't do it, it'll never be done right. And P.S., no one sees me anyway. When I realized that this is what created the breaking point, I realized then and now that this is where change begins. And so this is what led to the Aurora method, because I realized what was shaped by those early life experiences and those initial beliefs and how they created my cascade could be reshaped. And that led me to the creation of the Aurora method. And so the Aurora method, I was telling John this the other day on the podcast. The Aurora method is nothing new. In my experience, I tried everything to change. I went to therapy, as you heard from my journey. And what I learned is that things are sort of in isolation, right? The therapist will have me work on my trauma. The therapist will have me work on anger. Then I went for body work. I went for all sorts. I took supplements. I read self-help books. Anything you could think of, I tried to change this burnout. And what would happen is it would come back. And what I mean by that is I would start feeling overwhelmed, then the conflicts would occur. And then here I was again, having reactions that I felt ashamed of. And so what I said to John the other day was, I said to myself, I'm smart. I got to figure this out. What I realized was we really didn't have a path that we could practice as a stepwise approach to managing this city of limitation that resides inside our mind. So the Aurora method is really a 4-phase, 8-practice program, if you will. And it starts with self-awareness. When we're aware of ourselves, right, we can change, as you just learned. So the first step is, in the first phase, is really naming those things, as I just showed you, recognizing, essentially what those initial beliefs were, so that then you can go into the second phase, which is phase 2, which is the breakthrough phase, where you now have emotional clarity. You're looking at things in a non-judgmental way. You're simply looking at, how did this affect me? And you get to see your patterns, and then you recognize what perspectives need to shift. So let me give an example. If I'm self-reliant, the perspective shift is, I need to accept help and let people help me. If I'm self-seeking, I need to stop asking for recognition, and I need to know that I'm doing okay. And so knowing what I need to do is great, but the next phase is, oh gosh, I'm sorry with this. The next phase is restoring connection and recognizing what changes and how it changes, which is really restoring connection to yourself. So in my example with self-seeking, that was an inside job. I needed to recognize and say to myself, good job. You got this. You don't need them to tell you. I needed to look at myself in the mirror and say, you look good. I didn't need my spouse to tell me I looked good. At work, I needed to know that I did a good job. I didn't need everyone patting me on the back. And what I found was that as I backed off of that, people actually started to give it without me asking. So the mending starts to happen on that side. But on the other side is when we recognize and we can name some of those issues, and we start to shift our thinking by daily practice, because what you learn in the Aurora method is how to create your own personalized mindfulness program, your own personalized practices and affirmations that work for you. You then start to restore connection through what I call acknowledgement conversations. You're able to laugh at yourself and acknowledge these things and really help people feel understood, because as they feel understood, you then start to restore that connection, because it's not about headbutting anymore. And the last phase is the maintenance phase. And this phase is really about that daily practice. So as you restore connection and you reconnect to yourself, you start reconnecting with others, you're feeling better in your life. And this is an 8-week program. Um, then you got to keep what you got, right? You have to keep what you found. And that's really where you practice daily. It's a 5-minute daily practice. And then the last phase is really where all the change happens. That's the conscious action phase, where we're living in intention, paying attention to those issues. And when they creep, taking a 1-minute reset, right? So for me, sometimes it'll be, especially now around the holidays, I just Thanksgiving the other day for me here in the US, I had my house, my family, and people wanting to get involved, and I was able to delegate in a calm way rather than which is normally where I would go, and because I could make intention conscious practices and take intentional conscious action. And so for me, it really restores clarity, it restores confidence, it restores calmness, and most importantly, it restores connection. So okay. So for many people, they'll say to me, well, what are the results of this, right? And so I've had the privilege of helping dozens of professional women, because in my role as a CEO over the last 20 years, I've been practicing this for a while now. People would see my change and say, gosh, how did you do that? And I started getting, believe it or not, referrals to mentor other professional women. So I've mentored dozens and dozens of women. And what I saw was the same result. When we learn how to change, we shift the dynamic of every relationship that we touch. What did I see? I saw things like calmness, and I saw things like going from unaware to aware. I saw things like going from disconnection to reconnection. I saw repaired marriages. I saw restored relationships with estranged family members. I saw better relationships with one's manager at work. Why? Because this gives us the ability to voice our truth, so express our needs in a calm, confident way, establish boundaries in a calm, confident way, not in an angry way, and basically bringing us back to center in a grounded way so that we can actually start to shift those dynamics. And so the thing that I always loved is I have people who say to me, oh my God, like my husband's changing. No, he's not changing. You're changing. And as you change, they change. So that's the whole idea of the Aurora method. So many people say to me, how do I do it? What do I do? So, if you know anyone who's ready to restore that clarity, calm, and confidence and struggling with connection, there's 2 ways to learn the Aurora method. The first is through my book, Lifestorms Finding Your Clear Sky. It's available on Amazon. It's also available on my website, so I put a QR code here. All you need to do is go there, click on the book tab. You can actually read an excerpt from it, and if you'd like, once you download the excerpt, you can just go ahead and buy it. It takes you directly to Ingram Spark, which is a global distributor of the book. But on the other side of it, what I find is many people who struggle with burnout often can't even find the time to read. They just want someone to tell them how. How do I do this? What do I do? Please show me. So what I'm offering is the Aurora Method Academy, which is an 8-week course. And what I can guarantee within that 8 weeks is restoration of at least 2 very important relationships, because that's what it brings back to you. And so the Aurora Method Academy is an 8-week course. I'm doing it currently in a group capacity, and for those that don't want that, I'm offering a special offer to do a one-on-one. Again, if you go to the QR code, you have the ability to just click the Aurora Method Academy. If a group option is not right, then clearly you can set up a one-on-one consultation with me and determine whether or not it's the right path to do a one-on-one. So with that, this is the Aurora Method. I thank you for your time and attention today. And I'm absolutely thrilled at this opportunity. And basically, what I really wanted to say was thank you, John. I'm just trying to figure out how to close my slides and stop sharing my screen. Thank you. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to help.
Great. Well, Tracy, we're going to pass the questions on to you. Okay. If anybody has them, put them in the toolbar. Okay. And Keith will make sure that we get them over to Tracy. Okay. Just for the sake of time, because we promised everybody 90 minutes. I know it's still a holiday weekend, but thank you so much, Tracy. Just in closing, we're going into a new year. right? I mean, roughly 30 days from now, right? New Year's weekend. Hard to believe, right? Another year behind all of us. What would one thing that they could start to do today to change their thinking so that 2026 is the best year ever?
Yeah, I call it the 1 minute reset. I mean, so what I oftentimes find is we're feeling overwhelmed. It's like, breathe in calm, hold it, count to 3 or 4, breathe out, overwhelm, breathe in, and what I always do is affirm I'm handling it. And so I just breathe in, hold, breathe out, and I affirm I'm handling it. What I find is it just resets me pretty quickly.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Tracy. Appreciate it. Great job. And
Thanks, everyone.
once again, we'll have this up on YouTube as well.